The air in Munich on the morning of September 5, 1972, was supposed to be filled with the spirit of friendly competition. The 20th Olympiad was in full swing, an event West Germany had called the Happy Games. It was a deliberate attempt to erase the dark memories of the 1936 Berlin Olympics, which had been held under the shadow of the Nazi regime. For 11 days, this vision held true. Athletes from around the world competed. Records were broken. A sense of optimism prevailed. But just before dawn, that carefully constructed image of peace was shattered forever. A different kind of contest was about to unfold. No rules, no medals, no winners, only losers. The world was about to be introduced to a new and terrifying form of political violence, broadcast live into their living rooms. Suddenly, the global television feed cut away from the swimming pools and running tracks. Something terrible was happening inside the Olympic Village. Masked figures had been seen scaling a fence. Gunshots had been heard. The initial shock quickly gave way to a dawning horror as the facts began to emerge. A group of Palestinian militants had stormed the apartments housing the Israeli Olympic team. They had killed one person and were holding several others hostage. The name of the group responsible was Black September. The name itself was a dark promise, a reference to a brutal conflict that had taken place 2 years earlier, far from the manicured lawns of Munich. The world watched, paralyzed. The Olympic Games, the ultimate symbol of international unity and peaceful human endeavor, had become a stage for a bloody political statement. The television cameras that had been set up to capture moments of athletic triumph were now pointed at a balcony where a hooded man stood guard, a chilling silhouette against the Bavarian sky. The name Black September was a declaration of intent. It was chosen to commemorate the violent expulsion of Palestinian fighters from the Kingdom of Jordan in September 1970. That conflict, known as the Jordanian Civil War, was a brutal and defining moment for the Palestinian Liberation Organization. It was a period of immense loss and humiliation, and it radicalized a faction of fighters who felt that conventional diplomacy and warfare had failed them. They believed that only through spectacular acts of violence could they force the world to pay attention to their cause. The attack in Munich was the brutal fulfillment of that belief. A direct and bloody line drawn from the battlefields of Jordan to the heart of Europe. The world had just, started to understand a new kind of threat. To understand the attack in Munich, one must first look back to the events of September 1970 in Jordan. At the time, the PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, had established a powerful state within a state inside the country. They controlled refugee camps. They ran their own checkpoints. They openly challenged the authority of Jordan's King Hussein. For the king, this situation was untenable. It threatened the very sovereignty of his kingdom. Tensions had been simmering for months, but they finally boiled over in September. Palestinian militants hijacked several international airliners. They flew them to a remote airstrip in Jordan. They blew them up after releasing the passengers. This was the final straw for King Hussein. He ordered his army to move against the Palestinian Fedayeen, or commandos. The resulting conflict was swift and merciless. The Jordanian military, well-trained and loyal to the king, shelled the refugee camps in Palestinian neighborhoods where the fighters were based. The fighting lasted for about 10 days, but the devastation was immense. Thousands of Palestinians were killed in the crackdown. Fighters. Thousands of Palestinians were killed in the crackdown. Civilians. By the end of the month, the PLO's power in Jordan was broken, and its leadership was forced to flee to Lebanon. For the Palestinians, this month became known as Black September, a time of betrayal and catastrophic defeat at the hands of a fellow Arab nation. This defeat created a deep rift within the Palestinian movement. Many of the younger, more radical members felt that the PLO's leadership had failed them. They believed that Arafat's more conventional approach was not working, and that a new, more ruthless strategy was needed. Out of this anger and desperation, a new organization was born. They took the name of that bloody month, Black September, as their own. It was a secret group operating in the shadows, and its members were drawn from the most militant factions of Fatah, the dominant party within the PLO. Their goal was simple: to avenge the defeat in Jordan and to use any means necessary to advance the Palestinian cause. The structure of Black September was deliberately murky. It was designed to be a deniable asset for the PLO. While Yasser Arafat publicly disavowed any connection to the group, many intelligence agencies, including Israel's Mossad, believed that Black September was controlled by Fatah's intelligence chief, Salah Khalaf, also known as Abu Iyad. The group operated in small, independent cells, which made it difficult to infiltrate or dismantle. Its members were highly motivated and trained in espionage, sabotage, and assassination. Their mission was to strike at Israeli and Western targets anywhere in the world, to ensure that the Palestinian struggle could no longer be ignored by the international community. The planning for the Munich operation was meticulous, a testament to the cold, calculating mindset of its leaders. The key figure behind the attack was Ali Hassan Salameh, a charismatic and well-educated man known as the Red Prince. He was the head of Force 17, Yasser Arafat's personal security unit, a senior leader within Black September. Declassified documents from Israeli and German intelligence archives show that Salameh was the mastermind. He conceived of the idea to use the Olympics as a global stage. He recruited the team. He arranged for their training in Libya. He oversaw the logistics of the operation from a distance. His goal was not just to free Palestinian prisoners, but to shatter Israel's sense of security and humiliate it in front of the world. The operational leader on the ground was Ludif Afif, Issa. He grew up in a Christian family in Nazareth. He became a committed Palestinian nationalist. He studied engineering in West Germany. He spoke fluent German, making him ideal to lead the team in Munich. Survivor Shaul Ladany escaped the Olympic Village. His testimony describes the calm, determined demeanor of the attackers in the initial moments. Issa presented the terrorist demands to the German negotiators. He was the face of the operation. His voice is on recordings of the tense negotiations that followed. The commandos were young men, mostly in their early 20s, recruited from refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria, filled with desperation and a burning desire for revenge. Intelligence profiles by Mossad and the CIA found they were not hardened criminals, but young idealists radicalized by displacement and conflict. They received minimal training, just enough to handle Kalashnikov rifles and grenades, told they were on a mission from which they would likely not return. For them, it was a suicide mission, a final act of defiance. The primary objective: secure the release of 236 Palestinian militants held in Israeli prisons, along with 2 German left-wing extremists, Andreas Baader, Ulrike Meinhof. Issa threw the demand letter from a balcony. The prisoner list revealed the group's political alliances and broad revolutionary ideology. The tragedy of Munich was compounded by the fact that it could have been prevented. In the weeks and months leading up to the Games, German authorities received multiple warnings that an attack was being planned. Declassified files from the German Federal Intelligence Service, Bavarian State Office for the Protection of the Constitution, show a trail of missed opportunities and dismissed threats. One report, dated August 14, 1972, came from the German embassy in Beirut, citing a confidential informant who warned a Palestinian incident was being planned for the Olympic Games. The warning was passed up the chain of command, but deemed not specific enough to warrant action. Israeli intelligence also had inklings. Mossad had been tracking Black September since its formation and was aware of the group's growing capabilities. King Hussein of Jordan personally warned Chancellor Willy Brandt of a possible threat. But West Germany's prevailing mood was determined optimism focused on a friendly, open, and non-militaristic image. So security was scaled back. The unarmed, brightly dressed Olis were meant as approachable guides, not a serious deterrent to a determined terrorist cell. A specific warning came days before the attack. Dr. Georg Sieber was commissioned to create worst-case security scenarios for the Olympics. One of his scenarios, numbered Scenario 21, was chillingly prescient. It described armed Palestinians scaling the perimeter fence of the Olympic Village, breaking into the Israeli delegation's quarters, killing a hostage, and demanding the release of prisoners from Israel. The scenario was dismissed by the Security Committee as being too improbable. They believed such an attack was simply beyond the realm of possibility in the peaceful atmosphere of Munich. These intelligence failures created the perfect conditions for the attack to succeed. Section 5. The Siege at Connollystrasse 31. At approximately 4:30 a.m. on September 5th, 8 members of Black September, dressed in tracksuits, carrying duffel bags, climbed the 2-meter-high chain-link fence and made their way to Connollystrasse 31, the building housing the Israeli team. Using stolen keys, they entered the first apartment. They immediately encountered Moshe Weinberg, the wrestling coach. Weinberg fought back fiercely, wounded one attacker, and was then shot and killed. His resistance allowed a roommate to escape through a window. The attackers forced the dying Weinberg to lead them to the other Israeli apartments. The terrorists stormed a second apartment and rounded up more hostages. Fearing another fight, they shot and killed weightlifter Yosef Romano, who had tried to attack them with a paring knife. His body was left on the floor as a warning to the remaining 9 hostages. 11 Israelis were now under control. 9 living hostages and the bodies of Weinberg and Romano. The terrorists barricaded themselves inside. The siege had begun. By sunrise, the world knew. Police surrounded the building. A team of German negotiators, led by the Munich police chief, established contact with the terrorist leader, Issa. Their demands: the release of 236 prisoners by 9 o'clock a.m., or they would begin executing hostages. The day became a grueling 20-hour ordeal under the intense glare of global media. The German authorities, desperate to avoid more bloodshed on German soil, tried to negotiate. They offered unlimited money. They offered to exchange the Israeli hostages for high-ranking German officials. Issa rejected all offers. It is not about money. It is not about Germans. It is about the Palestinian cause. Meanwhile, the Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Golda Meir, maintained a firm policy: no negotiation with terrorists. The German authorities were caught in an impossible position. Deadlines passed and were extended. Tension inside the apartment grew unbearable. Hostages were bound together. The terrorists grew increasingly agitated. Ankie Spitzer, widow of coach Andre Spitzer, later recalled seeing her husband on the balcony during a brief moment with the negotiators. He was in his underwear, hands tied behind his back. It was the last time she would see him alive. Psychological pressure mounted. The German government knew it had to act, but lacked experience and proper equipment for such a crisis. A decision was made to feign agreement to the terrorists' demand for a plane to fly them to Cairo, Egypt, to lure them into an ambush. That was the plan. Section 6. A night of fire and blood, the Fürstenfeldbruck disaster. The German authorities' plan was to trap the terrorists at the Fürstenfeldbruck airbase outside Munich. The idea was to have the terrorists and their hostages board 2 helicopters at the Olympic Village, which would then fly them to the airbase. A Boeing 727 jet would be waiting, ostensibly to fly them to Cairo. In reality, the airfield would be surrounded by police snipers who would eliminate the terrorists as they attempted to move from the helicopters to the plane. The plan was hastily conceived and, poorly executed from the start. The German police had no specialized sniper teams. The officers chosen were regular policemen not equipped with the proper rifles, night vision, or radio communication. Shortly after 10 o'clock p.m., the 2 helicopters landed, carrying the 8 terrorists and their 9 bound hostages, landed at Fürstenfeldbruck. The airfield was brightly lit, but the snipers were poorly positioned and had no clear line of sight. They also critically miscalculated the number of terrorists, believing there were only 4 or 5 attackers, not 8. When Issa and another terrorist walked out to inspect the waiting airplane, they found it was empty, with no crew. Realizing it was a trap, they sprinted back towards the helicopters. At that moment, at 10:30 p.m., the German police gave the order to open fire. The ambush immediately descended into chaos. The initial volley of shots missed its primary targets. 2 of the terrorists standing outside the helicopters were hit, but the others were able to scramble for cover, returning fire at the control tower and the snipers. One of the helicopter pilots was killed in the crossfire. A bloody gun battle erupted across the dark tarmac. The German police, lacking armored vehicles and tactical coordination, were pinned down. The standoff dragged on for over an hour. Just after midnight, with the situation at a stalemate, one of the terrorists threw a grenade into one of the helicopters. The aircraft exploded in a massive fireball, incinerating the 4 hostages trapped inside. In the ensuing horror and confusion, a second terrorist sprayed the other helicopter with machine gun fire, executing the remaining 5 Israeli hostages at point-blank range. The botched rescue attempt had turned into a complete massacre. By the time the firefight ended, all 9 remaining hostages were dead. 5 of the 8 Black September terrorists had also been killed, and the remaining 3 were captured. The world, which had been led to believe by German officials that the rescue had been a success, woke up the next morning to the horrifying truth. The happy games had ended in a bloodbath. The final death toll was 11 Israeli athletes and officials, 1 German police officer, and 5 terrorists. Section 7. Operation Wrath of God. A vengeance foretold. The aftermath of the Munich massacre sent shockwaves through Israel. The nation was plunged into a state of profound grief and rage. Prime Minister Golda Meir, addressing the Knesset, vowed the perpetrators would not go unpunished. We have no choice but to strike at the terrorist organizations wherever we can reach them. This public declaration launched one of the most secret and controversial counter-terror campaigns in history, Operation Wrath of God. Meir authorized Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency, to hunt down and assassinate those directly or indirectly involved in Munich. A special unit within Mossad, Kaidan, Hebrew for bayonet, was tasked with the assassinations. A list of targets was drawn up: senior members of Black September, senior members of the PLO. Over the next 2 decades, a shadow war spread across Europe and the Middle East. Mossad agents, under deep cover, systematically eliminated targets. The first was Wael Zweiter, a PLO official in Rome, shot 12 times in his apartment lobby in October 1972. 1 bullet for each murdered Israeli athlete, plus 1 for the German officer. That was followed by a wave of attacks: car bombs, remote-controlled explosions, close-quarters shootings, from Paris to Beirut. But the operation had tragic mistakes. The most infamous was the Lillehammer affair in Norway, 1973. A Mossad team mistakenly identified Ahmed Bouchiki, an innocent Moroccan waiter, as Ali Hassan Salameh, the Red Prince. They shot and killed him in front of his pregnant wife. Several Mossad agents were captured by Norwegian authorities, triggering a major diplomatic scandal and exposing the secret campaign. The incident raised serious international legal and ethical questions about state-sponsored assassination and the risk to innocent civilians. Despite setbacks, Mossad continued. The real Ali Hassan Salameh was killed in Beirut in January 1979 by a massive car bomb that also killed bodyguards and bystanders. The campaign showed Israel's long reach and its commitment to retribution, but it came at a high cost. Critics say Operation Wrath of God created a cycle of violence, leading to more retaliatory attacks and deepening the conflict. While it brought a sense of justice to some in Israel, it did not resolve the political issues at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian struggle, and instead set a more ruthless precedent for covert warfare. Section 8. The Unlearned Lesson. a new era of global terror. The Munich massacre was a watershed moment in the history of terrorism and counter-terrorism. Before 1972, such an event was almost unthinkable. Afterward, it became the blueprint for a new kind of warfare. The attack showed a small, determined group could stage a single, spectacular act. That act could command the world's attention. Live television coverage turned the attackers into global figures and broadcast their cause to hundreds of millions. This fusion of terrorism and mass media became a template for groups that followed. The Red Brigades in Italy, and later, Al-Qaeda in the 21st century. The world had lost its innocence. A new age of global terror had begun. The catastrophic failure at Fürstenfeldbruck exposed a grim reality. Governments were forced to completely rethink their approach to security. The botched rescue highlighted the urgent need for specialized, highly trained counter-terrorist units. West Germany quickly established GSG-9, Grenzschutzgruppe 9. Other countries followed suit. France created GIGN. The United States developed Delta Force. The legacy is visible today. Airport security, once notoriously lax, was dramatically tightened worldwide. The era of walking onto a plane with minimal screening was over for good. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East was also profoundly altered. The attack and Israel's response further radicalized factions on both sides. For many Palestinians, Black September, despite brutal methods, were seen as standing up to Israel. For Israelis, the massacre reinforced the sense of being surrounded by enemies. The attack hardened public opinion, making compromise with the PLO seem impossible for years. It deepened the cycle of attack and reprisal, pushing peace further out of reach. The events in Munich also had a lasting impact on the Olympic Games themselves. Never again would the Games be held with such an open, trusting approach to security. From 1976 onwards, the Olympics have been hosted with a massive security apparatus. The Olympic Village is now a fortress, high fences, surrounded by surveillance cameras and armed guards. The dream of the Happy Games, a world united in peaceful competition, was replaced by a grim reality. The spirit of the Games survived, but it would forever be shadowed by the memory of Munich. Section 9. The Echoes of Munich. Over 50 years have passed since the tragedy at the Munich Olympics, but its echoes continue to reverberate in our modern world. The grainy images of the masked terrorist on the balcony have become an indelible icon of the age of modern terrorism. The attack at Connollystrasse 31 was more than just a hostage crisis. It was a turning point that fundamentally changed the way we think about security, international relations, the power of the media. It was the moment when terrorism stepped out of the shadows and onto the world stage, turning a celebration of life into a spectacle of death. The legacy of Munich is a dual one. On one hand, it is a story of failure of intelligence to heed the warnings, failure of security to protect the athletes, catastrophic failure of the rescue attempt. A permanent, somber reminder of underestimating a threat and being unprepared. Lessons from Fürstenfeldbruck led to the creation of professional counter-terrorism forces, now standard in national security worldwide. The attack forced the world to confront a new and frightening reality. On the other hand, the legacy is one of human resilience and memory. For decades, the families of the 11 murdered Israeli athletes fought for recognition from the IOC. The IOC resisted formal moments of silence for years, fearing politicization. It was not until the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, held in 2021, that an official moment of silence was observed. This long struggle highlights ongoing pain and the need to remember the victims beyond geopolitics. Ultimately, Munich 72 is a cautionary tale, a localized political conflict exploding onto the global stage. Grievances left to fester can mutate into violent, desperate acts. The world Black September helped create is the world we still live in today. Public spaces can become targets. Security is a constant concern. The threat of terrorism is ever present. The 11 athletes and the German police officer who died in Munich were not just victims. They were the first casualties of a new kind of war, still being fought today.